moving on, any techniques for recording vocals, aggressive vocals with like a really wide dynamic range?
Lot of different mic choices.
Right.
I've never found one that works for everybody.
No.
I always put up at least 3-4 microphones and try them out on a vocalist.
Sure.
And sometimes you're really surprised at the one that works.
Okay, moving on to the mixing side of things. Talking about drum samples, which we've talked about briefly on the albums where you do use drum samples. What sort of, do you use software or do you use tab to transient, and do you use well, you've already said that you use multiple samples actually to really layer them up. So what sort of software, or do you use tab to transient within Pro Tools to layer up different samples?
I have done that, I did that for years, but these days I use Drumagog.
Really?
I love it.
Right.
It is, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best thing I've ever used.
Right. Do you use drum samples as complete replacement or just reinforcement?
Very rarely. I have done stuff. Usually, if it's complete replacement, it will be when I'm mixing an album that someone's recorded
And it's been,
themselves,
yeah.
you know, on a budget,
Yeah.
either in a crap studio or at home.
Sure.
You know, when you just hope that you can get something out of the overheads for the
Yes.
cymbals and then just trash everything else and replace it.
Sure.
But if it's something I've recorded, I very, very rarely replace a sound completely.
Yeah.
It would just be an addition to...
A reinforcement,
Yeah.
yeah. And generally, how many samples would you use? Just 2 or 3 for the kick, or?
Kicks, I make one killer sample and variations of it and just use that.
Right.
With snares, it's different.
Right.
I tend to layer up snares. I'll have 3 snares running
Sure.
and mix them differently for different sections of the songs.
Yeah, because when you were talking before about mixing the overheads and the spot mics, taking a snare sample, is that the same with the kick samples from the kit that you record with?
Quite often, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can usually make up a good collection of samples, you know, get the drummer to play 12 good hits, you know,
Yeah.
mix the internal mics with the room mics or the head mic, or...
Do you ever compress your overheads?
Yes.
Right. And do you have your overheads hard left and hard right if it's a space pair?
Not usually. They're usually brought in a bit.
Brought in a bit, okay. Do you ever use parallel compression on your drum tracks? Like, do you ever usually have a drum group?
Not in the extreme metal stuff.
Right.
In a lot of the other stuff I do.
Right.
Because I do a lot of acoustic stuff and a different kind of field altogether.
Right.
I do tend to use a lot of parallel compression in that. But with the metal, I don't know, it kills it for me.
Right, okay. Any pointers about keeping a controlled, tight low end, particularly the kick and bass, while keeping the sound heavy?
Sidechain compression,
Right.
kick to bass,
Yeah.
multi-band compressor if you need to.
Right.
Just, yeah, especially if you've got chugging guitars
Right.
booming away
Sure.
with double kicks,
Yeah.
and the bass player's playing an open E all the time.
Right. Yeah.
You've got to level them out with each other.
Sure. Do you ever use any sort of intelligent EQ principles? In other words, if you're boosting one instrument in a particular area, you'll pull those frequencies in another?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep, yep.
You feel like that works quite well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And high pass filters?
Yeah.
Right across the board?
High and low for,
Right.
you know, where necessary, you know, everywhere possible, really.
Sure. Ever compress your guitars?
Yes.
Right.
Not a lot,
No.
apart from solos.
Okay. Do you EQ the individual guitars, like the individual 4 guitars, or do you EQ on the group?
Both. Because quite often, if I'm doing 4 guitars, it'll quite often be different amps.
Right.
2 of each amp,
Sure.
or a different guitar, 2 of each. So I EQ in pairs,
Yeah.
and then as a group.
Yeah. Do you ever take your mixes out of the studio into other environments?
The car,
Right.
I don't know why, the stereo in my car's crap, but I know it.
Yeah. If it sounds good on there, then
Yeah.
chances are, yeah. And what about volumes when mixing? Do you try and keep it well down?
Up
or
and
vary?
down, up and down all the time.
That pretty much brings us to a close on the mixing side of things, so we'll just move on to finishing section just about mastering. So Russ, do you feel that mastering is an art and a science reserved purely for the experts?
No.
Right.
It is an amazing skill, but it's perhaps not quite as much of a dark art as people would make out.
Right.
But saying that, I am a long way from being an expert at mastering.
Right.
I've got into mastering purely because there's so many people doing it on a budget now, and people go, you know, send your track off on the internet and get it back for $25.
Yeah.
I've heard some horrific results.
Right.
So that's why I got into doing it, so that for bands who can't afford expensive, good quality mastering, at least it's going to be better than that.
Sure, sure. If you were sending off one of your own mixes to mastering, which we've already spoken about with the Evil album which you recently completed, what sort of master bus processing would you use on that? Would you use just a bit of compression, or would you put a mastering plug over it?
When I'm sending mixes off, I take everything off completely.
Yeah.
Because I know that when I'm mastering stuff, I don't want it to be processed already.
Sure. But you'll actually mix with the compressor over the bus to give you an idea of what the mastering will do, then take it off before you export?
Very rarely.
Oh, right.
Occasionally, we've got a Crane Song head.
Yeah.
Occasionally I'll listen through that just because it just limits it very, very slightly. It just stops the peaks.
Sure, sure.
And it's got the tape simulation on it, which is, you know, a little bit of tape saturation simulation.
Brilliant.
But only the tiniest amount.
Sure.
I want my mix to sound good as a mix straight away. Then, even if I'm not mastering it, then I will apply a limiter and whatever else, just to see what it will be like when someone has a go at it.
Sure.
And then I may go back to the mix and change a few things.
Sure. Russ Russell, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent.
Pleasure.